Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of our European People's Podcast series dedicated to the members of the EPP Presidency. Today we have the pleasure to have here with us our Vice President Esther de Lange, who is member of our Dutch member party, CDA, and the Vice Chair of our EPP group in the European Parliament. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. So as I said, you're a member of a CDA, our member party in the Netherlands. And CDA is going soon to co-host next month in Rotterdam the 27th EPP Congress, finally, after that to be postponed last year due to COVID. So what are your expectations? Are you looking forward to this Congress in your own country?
Yeah, that's a double question. And first of all, yes, we're really excited to welcome the members of the EPP to Rotterdam very soon. As you said, it had to be postponed, unfortunately, because of COVID. It means that after, I think, 2 years of digital meetings, also inside the EPP, at least most of our meetings have been digital, we finally get together again in person. And I think that's really important. I'm expecting it to be a real family meeting in a sense, because we can meet again. And of course, there are very pressing issues on the agenda. We have important elections, furthermore. And I very much hope that with our values paper, we will manage to translate the age-old values that are still very relevant, that we hold very dear within the EPP, that we can translate them to the new challenges and the modern time.
Actually, this brings me to my next question, because you are also chairing our EPP Working Group 1 on European policy, which ahead of each Congress has the main task, it transforms actually in a resolution amendment committee to prepare all the documents for the Congress, and especially the one you're just talking about, the one on values. Can you tell us a bit more, like the philosophy behind the text and how is it relevant today in the difficult times we are living?
Well, when we started the process, what we wanted to do was like I mentioned, take our founding principles and see how they relate to the modern times. Of course, that doesn't mean changing our values. We would never do that, but learn also the lessons of the things that happened in the past. We could build, fortunately, on a lot of work that was already done. For example, in Bucharest, very important decisions were taken by the EPP on the issues of our basic program and foundations, so to say. But we set out really to talk about our philosophy, as EPP, and how we translate that within CDA is very much what kind of Europe do you want to pass on to your children? We're a party of families, I think, and we find it important that not only these values, but also this European Union, we create in such a way that, it is fit for the future and for our children. So this is what we wanted to do. We've done that. And in the same time, of course, we wanted to touch upon policy challenges that are always there in Europe. Work never stops. But of course, then we had COVID. And this meant that we had to take that into consideration as well. Suddenly, you notice that things that we've taken for granted, like freedom of movement, were not so automatic anymore. So there's a whole chapter on the challenges that we saw flowing from COVID. And of course, our economy. I've just come from the European Parliament. It seems like a word like competitiveness is something that other groups, other political families don't want to touch upon. When we try to get it into economic text in the European Parliament, the Social Democrats resist. And I would think why? One of the biggest challenges is also to prepare our economy for a double transition, the digital one and the green one, in such a way that we create jobs in Europe and that we keep our competitiveness. So it's a big box, this values paper, and when you unwrap it, you will see that there's a part on the values, a part on the challenges, and on the lessons learned.
And of course, even when there is not a Congress, your working group is very, very active because you receive plenty of policy proposal, of policy papers from the EPP, but also from our member parties, organization groups. Are there some topics that you find more pressing or exciting, important right now?
Well, there's pressing and there's exciting, right? Yeah. And I think the pressing issue, of course, unfortunately, is the fact that there is war again on the European continent. So Putin's war in Ukraine is really forcing us to stand for our values and to also help those who are effectively defending our values, which is what is being done on a daily basis by very brave Ukrainians who are literally in trenches to defend the values that we hold high as a European Union and a European People's Party. So this is the top of our agenda and everything flowing from that. Maybe we will have the opportunity to talk a bit more on that later. Other issues that are really important are the ones that are, of course, in the values paper. So the ones that I discussed, we have a twin transition that we need to do in a good way. For me, the Green Deal proposed by the Commission will only work if it creates jobs in Europe and if it creates prosperity in Europe and if we leave nobody behind. So there's a lot on the agenda, really, and issues that I personally hold very high following the COVID crisis is that we learn to really work on a healthy continent, right? Nowadays, too much. For example, your chances of surviving cancer are higher if you're born in one member state or in one region than they are if you're born in another member state. That should be unacceptable to us. The fact that because of COVID, kids were diagnosed much later with cancer, as a result of which their chances of survival are lower. This is horrific. We will have another, fallout from this COVID pandemic that we're not even fully grasping at the moment. And the fight against cancer has been a key priority for the EPP group and also for the EPP party. So, the list is long. I could go on and on and on, but I've touched upon the absolute priority. The fact that if the EPP doesn't fight for competitiveness and innovation, hardly anyone will nowadays. And a personal, topic of mine, which is health, and in particular for the younger generation.
Let's go back to what you said is the most pressing issue, the war in Ukraine, the Russian aggression. How does this impact your job also in the European Parliament, where I said you are one of the vice chair of the group, or you are the chair of the working group on economy and environment. How did your work was affected? It
affects you on two levels. On a personal level, because it's the first thing you think about when you wake up, and it's the last thing you think about when you go to sleep. On a professional level, of course, it means that you have to reprioritize. You cannot pretend that it's business as usual. On some issues, we were forced to act on issues that we should have acted upon ages ago. Not in my working group, but the issue of a common European security and defense. If you're very honest, we knew since 1989 that we should up our game in the European Union. We've tried. The EPP was always a driving force behind that, but steps have been too small. And now we're forced, to up our defense spending, etc. There's also examples where our work had to be completely reprioritized. For example, the Green Deal. You see energy prices soaring. You see people struggling to pay their bill. People with a small pension saying, okay, maybe I will not turn on the heating today, even if it's cold outside. Energy poverty, transport poverty, it's already happening. And then we got Putin's war in Ukraine, and prices were increasing even further. Now, you can pretend you didn't see that, which I think some colleagues in the parliament might be doing. They don't belong to the EPP, but they want business as usual. And I think we are very right in the EPP when we say we want the objectives of the Green Deal to be reached, but we might need to speed up some elements and be a bit more careful with other elements if we want to take everybody along and not just those who can afford it. So, for example, in the area of renewable energy, I think we have to speed up. In other areas that could have a price increasing effect on top of what we already see due to the war, we may want to be a bit careful. So yes, if you know how big the Fit for 55 package of proposals is, then you know that reworking that to take into account the war in Ukraine, Putin's war in Ukraine, you know that is a lot of work. And all my colleagues are doing this at the moment.
Speaking about the war, actually you co-signed a joint motion for a resolution about the situation on the Ukrainian border already on 15 December last year. So more than 2 months after the most recent invasion. And so at the moment when most commentators... before you. At the moment where most commentators were still not convinced that that would actually happen. What do you think? Do you think that you reacted correctly, how you were expecting when you drafted this resolution?
Well, first of all, I want to say something about the commentators and what you read in the media, right? And their analysis of, well, maybe the worst won't happen, so to say, you know, still at that stage. One of the biggest, you know, strengths, I would say, of the European People's Party is that we are represented in every member state of the European Union, in our neighboring countries. So we don't just read about, you know, the frontline countries in the media, in my case, in the Netherlands, but the EPP forces us, and that is good, to live the situation on the ground. And already years ago, when I went to the Baltic states, for example, not even in political discussions, you just needed to talk to your taxi driver who would tell you, okay, we're now driving towards the sea. If you drive the other way, you get a lot of dark forest, and behind the dark forest, there's Russia. This is what a Latvian taxi driver literally told me. And this is where you don't want to go, because this is where Putin is, and he has his eyes set on us. You know, this is something that Dutch people, Belgian people, Irish people, French people might not hear on a daily basis, but we knew, because we talked to our colleagues in the States who know best what not the Russians, but Russia, you know, the current regime in Russia is capable of, and what previous regimes in Russia have been capable of. That is our strength. So this is why, you know, we were taking this situation from the beginning extremely serious. And I signed that motion for a resolution because I had the impression that, especially in the Western European member states, not enough attention was given to this topic. So by putting my name as a Western European vice president of the party and of the group, you know, I tried to draw attention to the fact that, yes, this was a real risk. And unfortunately, we saw in February what Putin is capable of.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we also saw that even after the aggression, in some public opinion, it's difficult to let pass really the message that it concerns all of us, not just the neighboring
countries. Well, then you're back with our core values, right? Do you stand up and do you open your mouth, you know, when people are clearly spreading the wrong message? We had that discussion in the Netherlands when the European Commission banned Russia Today. And of course, when we say in our values paper that we stand for the freedom, you know, of speech and the freedom of the media, it doesn't mean that we stand for the right to just, propagate Russian war propaganda. So I fully supported that decision of the Commission, which goes very much against the kind of liberal line you would find in the Dutch media. But with freedom comes a lot of responsibility. And I think nowadays we notice that what we hold most dear, so the rule of law, freedom, democracy, is actually very vulnerable. All over the world, alternatives, so-called alternatives to democracy are standing up, right? Strong leaders in China and in Russia. And we should speak out when there are those who are flirting with that idea, you know. What does democracy bring us, they will say. You know, it's much quicker if we have a strong leader in power. Well, Russia shows you what can happen. China shows you what could potentially happen. So we're actually still this oasis of freedom and democracy, and we should cherish it and we should speak out for it. I hope this is one of the messages that we take away from this values document that we will discuss in Rotterdam.
And do you think that this is the EU and the EPP role to make sure that in the end these values that we cherish so much will prevail in the end over violence, over tyranny, over oppression.
For 70 years, of course, they have. In our side of Europe, since 89, they have on the continent as we know it, the member states as we know them until now. But the funny thing is that these achievements have been taken for granted, maybe a bit. I only need to look in my family, right? I'm born in the south of Limburg, which is, this funny region very close to Germany. It has been Belgian for a while. It's now Dutch. And my parents were really born, I think, not even 5 kilometers away from the German border. And my grandparents knew right after the war that if another war was to be prevented, it was through European cooperation, not by ignoring each other or, starting another war 20, 30 years later. So for my grandparents' generation, Europe was a deliberate choice to live in peace. And then for my parents, what was added to it was the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic development, being better off. Then comes my generation. I mean, we had no limits, right? We are the Erasmus generation. We could go wherever we wanted, freedom of movement. And the generation after that has all of that and didn't need to fight for it. It is there. But when you take things for granted, you might forget how important they are. So that is, to answer your question, how I see the role of this values paper, the role of the EPP, and the role of us as EPP leadership to make sure that we never, ever take these very fragile values like democracy, like the rule of law for granted. Mm-hmm. We need to speak up.
And let's hope we take example on our Ukrainian friends who are putting this into action with a real fight, right?
Yes, I mean, they are literally in trenches to defend the values that are important to us. And therefore, I'm quite sure that this will be a discussion at the Congress as well. But therefore, for me, it is very clear that when people from the trenches fighting for our values ask us, do we belong to your club? The only answer can be yes. We'll talk about the details later, but the first answer should be yes. So let's enough to talk about.
Yes, for sure. So let's conclude on a lighter note, maybe. Between all your commitment in the party, in the parliament, in CDA, do you still find time for yourself, and how do you like to spend it?
Yeah, every politician will say it's hard, I'm sure. But my assistants will know that the little free time I have, I really guard it very strictly because I also have an 11-year-old at home. I don't want to be, working so hard that afterwards I look back and think, okay, I've missed my child's childhood. So I would say that most of my free time would be family time. I find that very important. And my assistants also know that in the weekend I like to cook and bake. Often during the week I don't really have time. But that's what I do in the weekend. I try to make at least one dish from the office holding presidency. So I'm still very political, maybe also in my baking. And the results are then there on Monday morning for my assistants to test, So
that's very nice.
They will have to judge on whether this is a good hobby in the end or not.
I think they will be. Okay. They will agree that
Good.
It's a nice thing. Okay, thank you very much. I'll let you go because now you have a meeting of the
Working Group 1.
Exactly. So I thank you for your time. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for today's episode of the European People's Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe so as not to miss out and catch up with any episode you might have missed. Thank you very much and see you soon with another episode.